Welcome to the Color of Success podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Stephanie J. Wong, and today's episode is sponsored by My Wellbeing. Are you interested in going to therapy and don't know where to start? My Wellbeing matches you with a therapist based on your preferences and needs, including therapists of color. Get paired with a therapist today at mywellbeing.com/color of success. Margaret Cho is a Korean-American actress, musician, stand-up comedian, fashion designer, and author. She is a legend. So welcome, Margaret, to the show. Margaret, thank you so much for being here. I know that you've been super busy and having so much to do and speaking out against AAPI hate. And so I've done a lot of things in my life, in my short-lived life so far, but I think this is the one that'll make my parents proud.
Oh, I'm so glad. Thank you.
Absolutely. I wanted to just hop right into it because we both are from San Francisco and a lot has been going on right now. And I wanted to get your take on how you see the city and how it's evolved over time.
I think San Francisco is interesting because it's really changed so much. And I had an apartment there until about 2016. And so it's even changed since I've left. And, you know, it used to be this big, very hippie place. Of course, the Summer of Love was there and my parents were there for that. But it's turned into quite a tech empire and it's very wealthy now. So it's a really different city. I lived in the Sunset District. I lived in the Tenderloin in Japantown, the Castro, Lower Haight. I've lived all over the city.
Yeah, I grew up in Ingleside and Ocean View area. And so at the time, there were a lot of different pockets and neighborhoods, and it was kind of had a defined flavor or characteristic to it. So I definitely seen it evolve a lot. And, you did live in the Sunset, and back in my day, we considered that pretty safe. And now it's just become this target of attacks and such. And so I know that you've been speaking a lot about the AAPI hate, and before we connected, the Atlanta shootings had not happened. And so wanted to get your take on everything. So I'd like to just get your thoughts as you've been able to process things over the past few weeks.
Well, it's really disturbing because as an older Asian American woman, it's really like I'm the target. Like I really feel threatened. I really feel afraid. The fact that it's happening so much to older Asians is really troubling because the elderly are so important to our community. They're really like the holders of all of the stories and all of our history. And, you know, they have so much of value. So when they're threatened, it's really painful. It's particularly painful when it's women as well. So I think that San Francisco has always had actually a problem with anti-Asian violence. I mean, you know, you can look back all the way to the gold rush and the 1850s, 60s, 70s. San Francisco had the largest population of Chinese in America at that point. And they were all coming over, and whether it was coming out of like gold mining and then being denied that and kind of creating communities outside of the gold rush, then making laundries, making different kinds of businesses that they could run to survive. It was a really like a very difficult, heartbreaking time. And I'm doing a podcast now where I'm looking back at all of the historical hate crimes, especially against the Chinese, but all across the spectrum of Asian Americans. And it's really sad. So now all of these hate crimes are just another chapter in this long history of Asian American hate that Americans have had.
And I've been talking with so many community members, and obviously my family, my mom is now carrying pepper spray, and she looks very young for her age, but they're not going to discriminate on older versus not, right? And so it does make me really scared because I'm fortunate to work remotely, and she has to go out there every day in retail and deal with tons of stuff. And retail's tough anyways, but just this added layer. I think the other day, an Asian woman actually called her whitewashed. So it's an interesting phenomenon where there's just random things, seemingly random things happening, but really, like you mentioned, there's historical context too. So given all the things that are going on, what have you found to be sources of hope or healing, ways that we can advocate that will continue to move us forward in this process?
I think what really helps us kind of heal and move on and talking about it is really key. I think that actually sharing our emotional state at this time is really important. Also, aligning with other communities of color. I know that Americans are really having issues. You know, we're right in the middle of the Derek Chauvin trial, which is really important. And, you know, you would think that we've learned from this legacy of police brutality and violence that this is wrong. Yet some people are still defending Derek Chauvin for the murder of George Floyd. And to me, that's like, how could you even think that he would be innocent? How could anybody think that Derek Chauvin isn't a murderer? I mean, to see what we all saw and not conclude at the end of that Derek Chauvin's a murderer, it's to me very blind. It's very crazy. It's very, you're just kind of like doubling down on white supremacy and white violence. It's really an outrage. So the country is like really is still a mess, and I think connecting, talking about it, I think social media has helped a lot and that we can band together, but it's troubling.
Yeah. And what's great about it is that we were, in the terms of social media, we were connected with a mutual contact with PK. And I think that would have never happened if I didn't just randomly drop into a clubhouse room, right? And never my wildest dreams would I think I'd be sitting down with you talking about this situation. And because I'm a psychologist, I'm very aware of kind of the community level trauma, but also individual feelings. So you're alluding to the anger, the disappointment, the fear. And I think it's being felt among so many of us. And one of the things that I'm concerned about is, I saw a post the other day among Asian Americans in a group that said that we should arm and teach people to defend themselves, through different self-defense classes or martial arts. And so my big concern is having race wars or turning to violence. I can empathize with that. And at the same time, that's scary too. How can we cope together and not turn to violence?
Well, I'm just not a gun person. And I have been thinking a lot about what it means to try to protect yourself. And, for me, like, I just don't see myself ever carrying a gun or wanting to. To me, it's not something that I'm just equipped to do emotionally, physically. I just don't want that. I do think, though, that it's valid to kind of just be ready whenever you're out in public, whether it's having that kind of like the witness, which is our cameras and our phones, that can kind of help us. I feel like the fact that so many of these assaults and murders have been captured on video have been really important in us acknowledging the problems that exist. So I do think that there are things that can be done. I'm just not personally invested in carrying a gun. I don't know if I can speak to others, but it's just something that I don't think that I could do.
Yeah. And I think that piece is worrisome in general on my end, just because we're already seeing, like you said, the country's in a state of, it's a hot mess. And so there's shootings that are going on every day. It definitely doesn't seem like an answer overall, but I definitely hear people's pain. So one of the things is that you've been really vocal about coping with depression, coping with trauma, and going to therapy. I mean, we were joking that every time you asked your family to go to therapy, they would try to send you to Jeju-do or Jeju Island. So
yes.
Tell me a little bit about your therapy process as much as you feel comfortable with it, and what led to you actually seeking treatment and continuing to do the things that you need to do to self-care.
Well, Asians and Asian Americans traditionally don't seek mental health treatment. And I have a long history of depression. My family has a long history of depression, of suicide, of just problems that come from mental health, and also the lack of care for mental health and this stigma against seeking treatment. So I've spent a good deal of my adult life seeking different kinds of treatment. Right now, I have a whole thing that I do. I've kind of gotten it under control, but it's something that as an Asian American is hard to kind of convince other people in my family that it's not something that's like alarming and scary, and it's like actually really good. But they'll just sort of be the way they're going to be. But it's really it's a journey that's been long. I've done different types of treatment. There have been types of therapy that I don't like. Things that I found most helpful for me are things like EMDR as opposed to talk therapy. But there's different treatments that work on different levels for different people, and everybody has trauma, and however you cope with it is a very private journey. But for me, it's like, oh, well, I kind of work in an arena where talking about personal problems and trauma actually becomes art. So it's helpful to kind of examine all of that. And so I have, spent times in my life where I've really engaged in a lot of therapy. I've gone on big retreats. I've gone on lots of different kinds of therapy, sort of junkets and avenues. But right now, I feel like I've hit upon a kind of self-help program that's doable. And for me, I feel like drug therapy isn't the answer, but I've finally figured out sort of like exactly what I need to get through. And it's going to be different for everyone. And therapy changes, and because you go doesn't mean that things are so terrible. It's for me just about a maintenance and getting to a point where I feel good. I think it's a very difficult thing to engage in the world as an adult person of color. There's a lot to handle, and so therapy helps a lot.
And what would you say to people that are just kind of considering going? I'm getting so many Asian Americans, fortunately or unfortunately, coming to want to talk to me. And, we're at a difficult point where there's not as many BIPOC providers that can meet the demand. But for those that are even considering going to therapy, I mean, what would you say to them to kind of destigmatize the process?
I think it's really good. I think it's really helpful. I mean, I think that the brain and the heart and your emotions are just as important as the other physical systems in your body to keep working well. And sometimes we need some direction. Sometimes we need some assistance in getting where we want to get to. I think that mental health is really a very important thing. And also it helps if you're seeing a therapist that truly understands you and kind of gets what you're talking about, where you're coming from. And so having somebody that gets your journey and understands that they don't have to necessarily be a person of color or your same gender or queer or whatever, but sometimes it's a little bit easier if they are. So it sort of just depends on your situation and what you're looking for. But I always think there's nobody that is like exempt from suffering because of mental pain or suffering because of emotional pain. And it's part of who we are. Even if you don't feel pain, that's a problem too. So when you're unable to access like your true feelings and what you really want, or you're having problems with attaining your goals, whatever it is, I think some insight from another person can help, whether that's therapy, but it could be a friend. But sometimes a therapist is a good choice because it depersonalizes the exchange and it makes it so much less loaded. Sometimes when you talk about your problems or your issues with friends or family, there is this engagement of needing to sort of like minimize it or maximize it or whatever. The problems that exist within the relationship become magnified. So when you sort of step outside of the existing relationships that you have to talk to somebody outside, it kind of helps.
Definitely. I mean, you said it really well. And I think a lot of times you can speak to your own family, but many Asian American families are very enmeshed, and the clinical would be all up in your business, right? They know every little thing, or they're talking about someone else's kids and kind of comparing, people's achievements to each other. And so I think it makes it really, really hard to take a step back. But I think that also plays into that loss of face or wanting to go outside and tell other people. So I think it's a really good idea to have a person to give another perspective that can kind of also reassure the client that there's confidentiality involved as well. How did you get your parents to go to therapy with you?
Oh, well, I forced them. I mean, I just forced them. Like they didn't want to. And yet I really insisted that they go. And the thing about Koreans is like, this is why you can't insist with Korean people, because they'll do what, if you insist, you have to do it. Like there's so much about Korean culture that's really nuanced, but the fact of somebody's insistence is like, you really can't say no. And so I really insisted and they couldn't say no. And that's, I think, the power that I was using to force them into a situation that they were made uncomfortable by, and they're still uncomfortable by it. They don't like therapy. They don't like the talking or sharing of our pain with an outsider, but that's what I need. So it's not really a way that they can be around it. If they have to go, they have to go. And that's sort of the condition of our relationship. And what's great is they're willing to do it in order to keep me happy in our relationship. They're very willing to do the things that I need them to do. And that's really fantastic.
And that's sometimes my back door to get the whole family in, right? Is like in the service of your child doing well in life and feeling connected and having friends. Because I think at the core, if your parents really want to be responsible, loving human beings, those things tend to be important to them. So it's a good sell, so to speak, to some.
Yeah. Yeah.
So how are your relationship with your parents now? And, you mentioned that there is this fear and you feel that you're going to be targeted, but I also have a different level of fear for my parents.
Well, my parents also have been in America since 1964, and they have this attitude like, you think this is bad, this is nothing compared to what we went through. And so there's a reason why old Asian people are old, because they're able to take the pain that they experience in their face and like kind of like absorb it, but not internalize that pain, because it's almost as if they can deflect it emotionally and not take it personally. And that's really powerful. And I think it's a really important lesson. I think that it's really vital that we take action against it. And our anger is real and our anger is important. But at the same time, we shouldn't let our anger hurt us, because anger is a really corrosive emotion and it can really burn you from the inside out. And so I try to kind of take it all in with a sense that I'm going to use the energy that it gives me to move us all forward and out of this period of racism and Asian American hatred, because I don't want to internalize that hatred. I don't want to make it so that I hate other people. I hate the other, or I hate people who are doing this to us. I want to find a point of understanding of why people are in pain and suffering and need to lash out. But I also want to take my parents' attitude like, this is nothing compared to what we went through. And oddly enough, it is in its own way getting better. So they do see progress, whereas I may not, but they're very much of the mind that we've been through this before. It's actually been worse before. We didn't have an outlet for change. We didn't have motivation to change, and we didn't have each other to change.
Yeah, there's something to be said about the times right now where people are putting out their thoughts on social media and the protests and all these kinds of things. And I mentioned to you, I have 2 daughters. And so I have a stake in this, to move things forward. I think if not, I probably would be a little apathetic, to be honest, because, sometimes you just want to bury your heads in the cover. We're all human. And at the same time, it's like they're going to have to live in this world after, hopefully, a long life that I have, but it's still going to be their environment. And so having discussions with them about diversity, having the books that are written by Asian American authors and history and so forth are just so important at this point. But I hope I get to that point where I can say, like, this was bad a long time ago.
Yeah, I mean, you want to get to a point in the future where we look back on this and say we learned so much and we got so much out of it, and this is really improvement. And so I feel like there's an attitude that I want to have that's about looking towards change, but also knowing that we're going to be okay and that we're going to make it through this as a better society.
So is switching gears to a happy thing, but you're a comedian, you're an actress, you've done fashion as well, a fashion designer and owner. How do you channel all these emotions into your art? Because there's so much inspiration sometimes from pain.
Yeah, there is. And I think that there's like a lot to be said for being able to take the suffering and the sadness and create something beautiful out of it. And so that's something that I want to come out of the quarantine and the pandemic with, that kind of work. And so I'm writing, I'm always writing, and I'm working a lot on what it's going to be, but not performing for a year is very strange. And so a lot of it is really kind of like, okay, well, I guess I'll see what happens when it happens. But for me, it's very depressing not to be able to perform. But there's got to be a way to like write about this and make jokes about this in a way that's very healing. And I know that there will be, but it's like, well, trying to figure out what that's going to be, trying to figure out how that's going to look, and also making it about illuminating the situation and making it light as opposed to compounding on the anger and the fear. So I'm looking to figure out how to write and how to speak about things that's very truthful, but at the same time, joyous.
I always wonder too, how people are going to readjust to human interaction again. It has given me job security because I'm like, a computer can't do my job. You actually need people. But we hugged my friend for the first time in a year because we both got vaccinated back in January. And it was such a bizarre thing. It was like, I actually get to like touch another human being that's not my inner pod. So, I mean, what are you looking forward to when you go back to performing?
Well, I'm most looking forward to just connecting with people and laughing and being around other comedians, which I think is a big deal. And I also want to go see shows. I'm an avid music fan. I'm an avid comedy fan. I'm an avid theater fan. I love going to movies. I love being out. So for me to be kind of in and sort of sequestered for so long is very strange. And I know that like, I'm just very social. I'm very kind of committed to nightlife in general. So those are the things that I truly miss. I truly miss live concerts of all kinds. And that's like, to me, when we get back to that, it will be really satisfying. So, and also just being able to be on tour. I have traveled quite a bit in quarantine. I've done a lot of different kinds of acting stuff and been on planes, but it's still very rigid because you're kind of out there and you're really, I've been very nervous and so it's been kind of like traumatic to kind of go places. But at the same time, you know, now that we know how to stay safe, I've had my first shot of the vaccine last week. And
awesome.
Yeah, it's cool. So I'll go back and get my second shot at the end of April this month. So, you know, I think it'll feel a lot better after that happens, but I'm looking forward to it.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a sense of relief when I got both of mine. Although the second one, just hopefully you take a day to yourself, because I think for a lot of people, it's a little bit harder. Although I've noticed that the older generation actually doesn't have much adverse reaction anecdotally. So that's very interesting. So speaking of maybe immunity building in that way. Are you a mental health provider looking to grow and manage your practice? Learn more about becoming a member at mywellbeing.com/color of success.
Yeah.
But that's exciting. I mean, I cannot wait to go on a plane. You can now travel within the US, but I'm like, there's not really many places right now that I want to travel that'll be fairly safe. And speaking to like your, you know, loving concerts and everything. I mean, before the pandemic, I portioned off time to be online to get my BTS tickets. And I was like, I don't want my money back. I just want to go to the concert. So I've been holding on to those tickets until it's rescheduled. So
I know that'll be great. I mean, I love that BTS gave a message about, you know, stopping AAPI hate, and, you know, they're so incredible. And I'm really looking forward to going to Korea and just seeing everything. Like, I was supposed to go last year, so hopefully it'll be able to happen. I don't think it's this year, but it'll happen probably next year that I'll go. But I was supposed to do a big tour of Korea and Japan, and unfortunately everything sort of was canceled. So everything's going to be moved to next year, I think.
Yeah. Oh, you'll have so much fun going back. And I definitely want to go to there again, because we went to South Korea and the Philippines before everything shut down. So that was our last family trip.
It's so great. I mean, I just love South Korea, and I love how just amazing and like exciting Seoul is, and the food and all of the music and the shopping and the makeup and the people and the dramas and all of that, to me, is like just so, it's foreign, but it's familiar because I speak Korean. So it's like super close to who I am. I get a hit here and there when I watch K-dramas or watch K-pop, or I'm kind of like engaged in Korean culture, but I really love it when I'm there.
I love it too. And obviously I'm huge in a BTS army, but it all started with K-dramas actually. And I've been taking Korean every Saturday for like 4 years, but I could not talk to you in this interview completely in Korean. It'd be like a first grader asking you a question.
It's hard. Yeah, it's hard. It's really hard. Although, like, I can really understand when people are speaking Korean. Like, I can watch K-dramas without the subtitles, and especially if I know it. Like, I'm just at the end of Penthouse season 2, and I'm like,
it's so good. I haven't watched it yet. I'm watching Vincenzo.
Oh, I'm gonna watch Vincenzo next. I mean, I'm excited about Vincenzo actually, and I'm excited about Sisyphus. I haven't started it yet, but I'm looking forward to it. Yeah. There's so many great K-dramas. Like, for me, that's sort of like a nice consolation, is to have the K-drama experience, because you get to see Seoul and you get to see a lot of these sort of locations, and like K-dramas, they end up sort of filming in the same places time and time again. So there's a lot of fun things about it, but there's nothing like being in Korea.
Yeah. And we can go on and on about K-dramas because I mean I could talk about it all day, but yeah, I'm so happy that you watch them and love them because I think it's been such a outlet for me for so many years, but also during the pandemic. I'm so glad Netflix got a clue and started buying rights till we have so much more accessible to us.
It's incredible. I mean, it's incredible what Netflix has given in terms of K-dramas, this incredible like library of greats. And I mean, the turnover for K-drama culture is so fast too. Mm-hmm. If you watch things from like the early 2010s, 2011s, it really feels dated. Like it feels like a really long time ago. It's so weird. Even stuff that's like 5 years ago feels like a long time ago because it's so up to the moment. So it's really interesting how the culture is so fast and it really is so self-referential. So I love it. I love it a lot.
I don't know if you've watched Startup yet, but it's so Silicon Valley. It's how it emulates that. And no, I totally hear what you're saying because, when you're watching quote unquote older dramas, even the way it's filmed looks a little bit different.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's it seems a lot longer ago than if you, I think it's because Korean culture is so fast. Everything's so fast that everything is just, it just moves so quickly. But I really appreciate all of the things they are putting out. And I'm an avid consumer.
When you watch Vincenzo, they do comment on actually American culture and events that are going on. There's been a lot of references to, gun violence here and things like that. I mean, not in the best light for us in America, but they are commenting on that, to speaking to your point of keeping it up to date and referencing like current events.
That's interesting. Yeah, I'm looking forward to watching it. I think there's like so much that I'm looking forward to in that particular drama. So it's going to be good.
Well, it's Song Joong Ki. I mean, it's it's him,
Yeah.
So when I told one of my friends, I kept the interview under wraps for, close to my heart. It's just been such a big thing for me to have you on the show. And so he was like, trailblazer, person that's been, an Asian American on TV when there was really no Asian Americans on TV. And I think I shared with you, my father and I would bond over watching your sitcom All American Girl, and before I went to bed, and so what was it like, and how do you think, and the meaning of being an Asian American on TV in the media?
It was a big deal in the 90s in particular, just because there weren't any Asian Americans on television. And so you never saw Asian people really in an Asian American context. You sometimes saw footage, especially then, of like the LA riots that just happened. And so you saw Korean shopkeepers in Koreatown with rifles on top of their rooftops. And, there was a very difficult time for Asian representation in television. Other than that, we were really invisible. And, at that time also the film The Joy Luck Club came out. And so then you kind of thought, well, we're going to have a presence in television. We're going to have a presence in the movies. But it sort of ended after that, which is so weird. So I think that there's a shift now. Also, television has changed. So we're not necessarily in the same space that we were in the 90s, where the images of us were so limited. I think with entertainment now, it's also a lot more globalized. I mean, if you look at BTS, it's the biggest band in the world. They're the most successful band in the world, and they're Korean. A lot of these Korean television shows are globally popular. So you have a lot more Asianness just on our screens and in the media outside of Asian Americanness. But I think what needs to emerge is a kind of Asian American ideal and aesthetic, which is coming. I feel like with Minari's presence here, it's like this year's Oscars really shifted. It's very exciting to see. There's much more of a presence with Asian Americans on television. And so, there's a shift in realizing that one is not enough, and that we are such a huge part of America and we deserve to have our stories told. So I think that it's actually happening. And when I was out there doing it, it was quite lonely because there just wasn't Asian Americans, and there wasn't this idea that our stories had value. And so now seeing that they do, and that they're receiving those accolades, it's really meaningful.
My kids would knock me if I didn't ask you, like, how was it working on Over the Moon and kind of the significance of that movie? Because I feel like that broke so many barriers, being on TV and having that cast. It was such a special movie.
It's such a special movie, and I love that it's nominated for an Academy Award. And I love the movie. It's such a beautiful film. And I got to be in Shanghai in 2018 with Pearl Animation Studios. I was there with Daniel Day Kim, and they were showing us the drawings. They were showing us all of the different costume designs for Chang'e, who's the moon goddess. And it was really special. And so we got to see everything kind of beforehand. And then doing the film was really amazing. It's all my friends like Ken Jeong. And, I love that, it's an entirely Asian American cast. And it's really profound. So it's a beautiful film. It was great to have that during lockdown. And, for us to be able to share the Mid-Autumn Festival through that film. And so we're all really proud of it.
I was so happy to give my daughters the dolls for Christmas. I'm like, this
is
amazing, right? Like you can go and
beautiful.
buy something that has our faces reflected, right?
It's so beautiful. And I love that kids get to have that and, really celebrate that. I think it's really powerful.
I'm so glad you're a part of that movie. So what advice would you give to Asians trying to get into the entertainment business? Because now, and very resourcefully, many have created their own content or, gone on YouTube, etc. But in terms of encouraging them, what's some advice that you can give them?
Well, I think it's just that we need their voices. I think that we just have to be emboldened to move forward. And I think that a lot of times people would push their Asian American children into careers that they could mathematically sort of calculate, whether that was jobs in accounting or banking or science, anything that had to do with things that weren't identity based, which we couldn't be rejected because of who we were. That was an important impetus. But now all of those things are different, and Asian Americans are really vital to culture and American culture. And so we've earned our place there. And I think that they need to be pushing their stories, pushing their points of view, and talking about themselves on the media that they're doing, whatever that is, whatever social media that is, their art form, developing their art form. I think it's a really important thing.
Absolutely. I love that you are going on Clubhouse and everything like that. I mean, how did you get into the app? Because it is a brand new platform. And how do you feel like we can kind of use it to connect with people and for others to hear our voices?
Well, I think Clubhouse is interesting because it's just really new and it's different and it's a different kind of social media. And a lot of people are really having an interesting journey in that because it's so brand new and so different. I mean, because it's not about these kinds of social media, curated photographs where you're kind of stylizing a life that's unattainable. It's really about opinions and storytelling and the way that we communicate, not in a way that sort of looking at the outsides of somebody's life, but rather going from the inside out. And so you have a whole different kind of content creator. You have a whole different population of people on there discussing these ideas and bringing forth these discussions that need to be had, as opposed to social media, which is a lot about whether it's sort of appearance-based culture or trying to look a certain way or be wealthy in a certain way. Like there was like influencers for a while that were renting out the set that was like a private jet. So it seemed like they were on a private jet, but they're not even going anywhere. So it's like, you don't have that element, which I think is really bothersome in social media because it makes people judge their own lives compared to other people's curated photographs, which are not even their lives to begin with. So I feel like Clubhouse is a very different approach.
Oh, I should have totally rented that out for our interview for fun. That would have been great.
That it was so funny. It's so funny though, because it's like, like, why do you need to pretend that you're on a private jet? Like, I'm like, why is that somehow a value? Like, to me, it's like, well, it's just a mode of transportation that's very, very costly to the environment. It might be expensive, yes, but it's way more costly in terms of like fossil fuels and the atmosphere and like the waste of resources that could be used for everyone. So I really don't think private flying is such a thing, right? No.
Right now, people are not on private jets. I mean, the majority of people. The only people I know would be BTS. And it makes sense because there's those sasaengs that are after them.
I know. Well, that's why they have to take the private jets, because the sasaengs book all of the flight seats next to them, which is so weird to me too. Like, why are you doing that? Like, you're just stalking, which is so weird.
Which is illegal.
Like, well, it's illegal, but it's also uncomfortable. It's like, if you like an artist, why not just enjoy their art? And you know, you don't have to invade their lives. It's not very kind to do that, but people are weird.
Yeah. I mean, have you had any weird stalker experiences? I'm so curious. Not that has to do with any particular question I've had.
I've had some over the years, but it's never been to the level of like a sasaeng, you know, that it's not really like that. So I'm in a very comfortable level, but it's very like, to me, the sasaeng culture is pretty intense and kind of scares me. Like, there's like always like so many people who just need to sort of define their lives through others. And that's kind of what a sasaeng, which is a sad sort of situation, is about, which I think it's also a phase that maybe younger people want to go through before they really find themselves who they are. But at the same time, I think all that stuff can be pretty invasive for the artist who's dealing with it.
Absolutely. I hope, you know, and I know that BTS handles it so professionally, and I just can't even imagine, you know, those weird stories of someone licking Jimin's like seat after he goes to the bathroom. It's like, seriously,
like, wait, what? I mean, it's
like, what do you benefit from that? Like,
I don't know. It's weird. It's like, yeah, he's your bias, but that's not a good way to show it. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I really hope that's not true, but I've heard it is true. So
I think it is true. I think it is true. I think that definitely happened. And I think that's why they can't take, you know, like commercial flights, because they're concerned for their safety, which they should be, because they're really a national treasure.
Yeah.
And such a global ambassador for Korea. So it's quite dangerous, I think, for any of that stuff to kind of get in their life. But who knows?
Well, they give so many people hope. And if you've ever been in any Clubhouse groups like about BTS or the ARMY, it is so diverse. That is the most diverse rooms that I've seen on Clubhouse, and just this common niceness about people in the rooms is just that gives me hope, because their message of positivity.
It's great. I love it.
I hope that, you know, you get to go to the concert and enjoy it. And
I would love to go see BTS. I would love to go see ITZY. I'm kind of an ITZY stan. I love EXO. I love, of course, Blackpink stan. I love I mean, I love like Hyuna. I love like old school, like Jessie. I mean, there's so many different artists. I mean, I love IU. I mean, they're all super different, super exciting. And so to me, it's really like, I don't know, K-pop is very special.
I love Jessie. I watch her short of you and
so cute.
Yeah.
She's so hot and she's so funny. I love her.
I know. She's just so blunt. And I'm like, I mean, how could you not love her? It's just so awesome.
She's great. She's so fun. So yeah, to me, all that is so exciting.
That's awesome. Well, I love it too that when we were in Clubhouse, you had a picture of your cat, I think, as your picture.
Oh, yeah.
And PK was like, next time I'd like to see your face. But thank you. So,
yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like, I think that, I should probably put a picture of myself up there, but I don't even know if I have any good ones. There's not really a sense of like needing to put a bio. I don't really, use it in that way. I actually use Clubhouse more to just listen to conversations that I want to hear. So I think that's good.
Yeah, I think the night of the Atlanta shootings, I just turned to Clubhouse because I wanted to see and have a community where I'm hearing other people's thoughts. And there were a couple of groups. Two of them were it's predominantly Asian Americans that I've seen in different circles. And another one was more mixed, Asian, Black, African Americans. And I went to that room because I really wanted to see more so the solidarity or lack thereof. I don't know. There were definitely some conflicting opinions, but I turned to Clubhouse just to get support during that time because I just did not know how to process it, even though my family was around, obviously. But it's unique in that way where it's a different level of social support too.
Yeah, it's a kind of engagement that's really, I think, valuable. I mean, Clubhouse is really interesting because it's really about figuring out another way to communicate that isn't about always like virtue signaling or about sort of the appearance of a life, a curated life that you're applying filters to or whatever. It's really just about talk, which I think is great.
Absolutely. Any new endeavors that we can kind of look forward to? I have to watch your FX special because I just saw that it was it launched today?
It's today. It's called Hysterical. It's on FX and Hulu. It's about women in comedy. It's a really great documentary. And then I have my podcast, which is called The Margaret Cho Mortal Minority. And it's highlighting the different recent Asian American hate crimes along with historical Asian American hate crimes. So we're going back to the gold rush and a lot of different events that happened to the Chinese, also through Japanese internment camps, through Vincent Chin's murder in Detroit. So there's a lot of things that reflect a lot of things that are happening now. And so it's a really important study on that and meditation on hate crimes against Asian Americans.
Well, thank you so much for continuing to do the work. And any other things that you would like to impart on the community or things that you would like to share?
I think that it's going to be okay. We're going to get through it. And we just need to like lean on each other to know that the myth of the model minority was put upon us because white establishments didn't want there to be a civil rights movement. So the idea of the model minority was brought up in the 60s during the civil rights movement in order to show Black people of how not to be. I mean, how to be like not speaking up for your rights, how not to be a minority. And so this is a thing that's damaged us throughout history and kept us apart from other people of color. And so we need to really understand that we have fallen prey to this idea of us being set apart from other minorities. And we need to like rebond with the rest of the oppressed and know that we as people of color together are stronger.
I couldn't have said it any better. Thank you so much, Margaret, for being on the show.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to the Color Success Podcast. Listen, like, subscribe on all major streaming platforms, YouTube, IG, and if you want exclusive content, you can join our Patreon. All links can be found at colorofsuccesspodcast.com.